Welcome to this evening, beautiful celebration of Lahiri Mahashaya's birthday. And his birth, in some ways, is so significant because without his birth and without his life, we would not be gathered here today. We would not have the Kriya Yoga technique. In so many ways, not only was he so integral in getting Kriya available to many, many people, but he also was the example of how to do that and how Kriya Yoga is applied in this daily life that we all have. Lahiri Mahashaya, and I'll just share a few more points of his life and just cover a few interesting things about him and touch on the most important ones. He was born, as we all know, Shama Charan, which is at the feet of Divine Mother. And I suspect that it's the beginning of Diwali and that his mother offered this child of hers at the feet of Divine Mother, just as Divine Mother's child and not her own. And it's so interesting even that later in his life as an adult, the great Nayaswami, who knew Lahiri Mahashaya very closely, said about him that he was like the divine kitten, going wherever the cosmic mother placed him. And so that, I think there was a really deep truth to this aspect of Lahiri Mahashaya and his nature. And you saw that in his nature. He had this incredibly benign, soft nature in a certain way. But really that was just a role that he was playing. We give a lot of emphasis to the fact that he was a householder and an accountant, and nothing against householders or accountants. Welcome back, Gaurav, from being away so long. But really what it was is that he was every man. He was every person. In some ways, I think it was less than that he was a householder or an accountant, but more was that he was not a Baba. And the reason I say this is that when you look at the people who came to him for counseling, they were family people, householders. And if a family person came to a Baba who lived up in the Himalayas and, never was with people and didn't have life experiences, if a householder went to a Baba and said, I'm having family issues, this is going on in my family life, what should I do? And if the Baba said, do more Kriya, this householder person would look at the Baba and say, you can do more Kriya, you're a Baba, you have all this time. I'm raising a family. What do you know about raising a family? I mean, how is that going to help me raising a family to do more Kriya? But to go to Lahiri Mahashaya, and he would say, do more Kriya, they can look at that person and say, yes, he knows what I'm going through. As strange as it sounds, his advice to do more Kriya, I know he knows what he's talking about. He has the experience of raising a family, having a career and a life. This whole thing of doing more Kriya is such an interesting thing that I want to touch on, because sometimes I think we think too much that Kriya is some magical thing, that it's like putting some money in a machine and pulling the lever and the answer comes out if we just mechanically do some Kriyas. But it's much, much more than that. What Kriya does is it puts us into the uplifted state of consciousness, if we do it correctly, where all answers are, where solutions are found. That's Swami Kriyanandaji talked about the superconscious state as the solution state, because it's a unitive state, and through intuition we find answers. And how does Kriya help us in the mundane worldly life? I had a very strange early experience with Kriya. I was on Swami Kriyanandaji's personal staff, and they built this beautiful fountain with some contractors at the Crystal Hermitage. And there was a problem with the pump and the leveling of the pump and the water coming into it. And it kept flooding this whole garden area because it wasn't working properly. And the plumbers could not figure out how to fix it. The person who installed the pump couldn't fix it. They all left, and I was left there holding the bag, as they say, because it was part of my job to oversee these things. In the morning, Swamiji would come out and he'd say, Devarshi, or Dave as I was known then, you haven't fixed this yet. What's going on here? I didn't have anybody else to go to fix it. One day I was meditating, doing Kriya Yoga, and all of a sudden, I'd taken that thing apart, I'd looked at it, I had done everything with my rational mind. One day I was doing Kriya, meditating, and the answer to a plumbing problem came to me, just out of the blue, of how to fix that thing. So Kriya Yoga can fix every problem. Not magically, but a plumbing problem. Just think, you cannot get more mundane than that. And think of business problems. And I know the creator, inventor of Swipe, the Android app that is on so many phones, he's a Kriya Yogi friend from Ananda village. And he said that when he was writing that program and coming up with answers and problems, he said he would pray to Divine Mother for answers and he would practice Kriya Yoga. And so Kriya Yoga and the uplifted state of consciousness can give answers to all of our problems. Now, Lahiri Mahashaya, this aspect of him being a householder is kind of humorous because I think we overemphasize that. Because the fact is that you read in Autobiography of a Yogi, he had a dispute with his wife. She was complaining to him about something, about not bringing enough money home or something like that. And he dematerialized, he vanished. And his voice came booming out from the cosmos everywhere. And then he reappeared. And I like the way that his wife put it. She said, with his head touching the ceiling. She didn't just say that he had risen up in the air. His head was touching the ceiling. And we can't do that, husbands and wives, with Kriya Yoga. And so it's not really a good role model. He really was just playing a role. And in fact, in that story, his wife said that when he said that, he said, where does our power come from? And when he was speaking to her up there in the ceiling, she said his eyes were blazing with fire. And that was really who Lahiri Mahashaya was. And we see this very benign photo, this beatific smile. And he was playing a role. Really, behind that role was an avatar who had extraordinary, great power. Now, the other aspect of Lahiri Mahashaya that was revolutionary in a certain way is that he interpreted the Bhagavad Gita in a completely new way, using a psychological approach and a metaphysical approach of a symbolic approach to the different characters. And it related very closely to Kriya Yoga. And I'll just touch on one aspect of that, which he said that the 5 Pandavas were the first 5 chakras, and that Draupadi represented Kundalini energy, which is a feminine energy of devotion and compassion and kindness and love, and that energy has to be awakened. And as it awakens, it marries and merges and touches each of the first 5 chakras and enlivens and spiritualizes them and awakens them. And so this is the power of Kriya Yoga. And it's not just technique. So often, Yoganandaji, Swami Kriyanandaji, I can't tell you how many times I heard Swamiji talk about the fact that we cannot do it by techniques alone. We have to do it with right attitude. We have to do it with devotion. This is why Master said that Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. Swamiji even said that if you just meditate for yourself, even for a good reason, your own realization, there tends to be some self-involvement. And he said, actually, without right attitude, meditation like that can actually be harmful because it actually strengthens the ego rather than dissolving the ego. And so right attitude is important. Yoganandaji, the way he put it was that Kundalini energy cannot be awakened by technique alone. He said every thought that you have, every kind of act that you have, these things also awaken the Kundalini. And so it really is that marriage of technique and right attitude that Lahiri Mahashaya brought, because he was living in the world. He had to develop the compassion to raise a family and support his wife as a person, as a disciple. And he was this very kindly engaged person because he was the example of Kriya Yoga, how it is really practiced and why it was brought back. It was not brought back so that the people in Maniket up in those hills in 1863 could practice. It was brought back so that people in Pune in 2016 and Gurgaon and Delhi could practice. This is why Lahiri Mahashaya said that Babaji said that the technique of Kriya, he brought it back because Babaji understood, as he put it, the complexities and influences of Western civilization. And that influence is all around us. It's no longer in the West, it's everywhere. And Babaji knew that that influence was going to spread all over the world and make people's lives complex, confusing, intensely busy, lots of energy, lots of noise, lots of temptations. That's why Babaji brought Kriya Yoga back, and it's why he gave it to Lahiri Mahashaya, or why he played that role of someone engaged in the world. He was an accountant. I imagine that an accountant at that time would be someone who would be an IT professional at this time, working with numbers and technical things. And I bet Lahiri Mahashaya was a really good accountant. I bet he focused with Kriya Yoga and did that job well. And as Sagar said last night, he graduated from that role and went into a more inward role that he went into later in his life. It reminds me of another accountant who was not a model that Yoganandaji held up. But I imagine he was the opposite of Lahiri Mahashaya. This was the great Bengali poet and singer, Ram Prasad. And the story about him as an accountant is that as he was doing the books for a wealthy landowner, there were several accountants. They finally went to the landowner and complained about their fellow worker because they were looking at his account books. And rather than numbers in there, he was writing spiritual poetry on the margins. And this is no advice for our accountant here. Although maybe he could try it out and see what comes of it, because for Ram Prasad, when these co-workers brought his account books to the wealthy landowner, the boss, in indignation and saying, this guy, you should fire him, the boss, he read those poems, and he was really, really uplifted. And he found these poems so beautiful that he told Ram Prasad, don't be an accountant anymore. I'll hire you and pay you just to write poetry. And that's what he did. He was hired as a poet. Well, Lahiri Mahashaya was a different example. He showed how to use Kriya Yoga to solve plumbing problems, to solve writing computer code, to raising a family, to doing all the things that every person in this room, I think, does every day. And really take this advice to heart. When Lahiri Mahashaya said, solve all your problems through Kriya Yoga, really understand that if you have a strong daily Kriya Yoga practice, that you will start to get into that uplifted state where all problems are solved. And it seems so impractical, but it also points out that Kriya Yoga is not a vague, fuzzy, mystical technique that takes us into a blank, spaced out kind of consciousness. Really, when practiced right, it is done with energy, with pranayama, control of the life force, awakening of the kundalini, much, much more awareness, intelligence, more perception, more ability to think, to solve problems, but also more compassion, more kindness. All the qualities, when you think about, when merged together, make the perfect human being. One who can live in this world, function with account books, with computer code, be compassionate, be kind, be selfless and serving others, and have a deep spiritual life where the Cosmic Mother put us divine kittens, because the fact is she did place us where we are right now, where each one of us is. If we start thinking, oh, I'll be happy or I'll be able to meditate more if I only am doing something else, but really Lahiri showed us that where we are, right here and right now, we can practice Kriya Yoga and we can find God, we can find divine union. So to me, this is the great inspiration and example and model of the great life of Lahiri Mahashaya. Finally, there's one more little thing that we have to really bow down and touch his feet, which is that Babaji initiated Lahiri into Kriya and told him, give this technique to those who are ready to renounce the world and really go for God, essentially. And Lahiri said, wait a minute. That leaves out almost the entire human race, essentially. I'm putting a lot of words into his mouth. But he said, wait a minute, Babaji, please. Lower the bar, lower the restrictions, so that those who are sincere and ready, even living in the world, can receive the Kriya technique. And of course, this was all a play between Babaji and Lahiri. I think they wrote the script before they came down into this earth. But thankfully, we are here because of that, because Lahiri requested that special dispensation from Babaji. So we have a lot of gratitude and a lot to be grateful for with this great avatar, Lahiri Mahashaya. Om Shanti.
Namaste everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. I also want to welcome the online audience, which is tuning in from different cities. I want to share and start, and I had planned my talk today to start with this line, which Devarshi ji kind of ended with, which is, here we find ourselves, where Divine Mother has placed us, because I think it was Master maybe who once, or maybe Swami voiced Master words. He says, we didn't even create ourselves. Master used to say there was this saint in India whose only prayer to God was, I didn't ask to be created. You created me. Now you must free me. And then Master ends the story, he says, by repeating that prayer again and again, you might say he nagged God so much that finally he had to be released, because that is the truth. Divine Mother puts us. Now, karma may have brought us to this point, but let us also not dismiss, the Swami used to say that in today's times, for 5 fully liberated masters to reincarnate as guru disciple must be meaning a major shift in civilization, maybe a turning point, maybe a divine will is trying to be expressed. So I would like to see it more with that light. And I want to start with a story of a very dear friend who is now no more with us, but I'm told he was our first Kriyaban in Mumbai. His name was Mr. Biswas. Biswas means no breath, and I would like to imagine that's how he ended his life, and I'll relate the story very briefly. Now, Mr. Biswas once asked me when I first met him. Before I went to meet him, Dharmdas ji, our then spiritual director, warned me. I said, I don't have a picture of him. How can I find him? Actually, he was asking me, so you're seeing Mr. Biswas in Mumbai tomorrow. We were organizing a program for Swamiji. He was the executive director of NCPA, National Center of Performing Arts, the premier institute for over 3 decades for arts performance in all of Asia. And he says, so you're meeting him. Where are you meeting him? You have his picture? I said, no. He says, don't worry, you'll recognize him. I said, how? He says, just look around for the sweetest man. And be sure, don't spend too much time close to him. You might get diabetes. I was like, he said, he said, I would even go as far as calling him the sweetest devotee we have in all of India. I was really eager to meet this gentleman. And sure enough, I met him. He was much younger than his age and the position he held, and very humble, just standing on the road. His driver was elsewhere, where he bowed, greeted us, took us, myself, Neha, Katyayani, to his office. And you would think he would jump into a big discussion. This was a big event for Swamiji we were doing. And he says, we were discussing some things. Then he was reading the biography, which was the book launch, and he had got that book. And he said, do you know which village Lahiri Mahashaya was born in? I said, Banaras. If you read autobiography carefully, that's the wrong answer. He says, no, he was born in Krishnanagar, near Ghurni village. It's a village in Bengal, and then he moved elsewhere. And after 2 hours of spending time with him, which was very, very enjoyable, I remember with very few people I've felt this feeling, I don't want to leave their presence. I don't want to leave this office. And he would keep ordering snacks or tell us, you know how acoustics works in the hall, and so on and so forth. But anyway, 2 hours later, he was very quiet. And I asked him, I said, where are you from? He said, I was born in Krishnanagar, in the same village as Lahiri Mahashaya. And I watched him very carefully as he delivered those lines. His eyes were low, he was very humbled. He was humbled by the fact that he was born in the same village. Where did Divine Mother place him? He said at the age of 26, he was reading a newspaper in Mumbai, came to look for a job, had to earn money, had lost his father early on, and saw this ad that requirement by Jamshed Baba, who was the brother of Homi Baba, the father of Indian atomic research. Homi Baba's brother Jamshed Baba had placed an ad for an individual who can help him build the best auditorium in all of India. A very interesting ad. So he said, I looked up the ad. I had no qualifications, but just to see what goes on, who are these people? He said it was happening for the first time, so he showed up. And he said, out of 26 people, by the end of the day, I was chosen. And he said, Jamshed Baba was describing an auditorium where people can come and perform. So he says, I asked him, can we go and see this place? He said, yes. And they both walked. And they walked till the end of Marine Drive in Mumbai. And looking at the ocean, Jamshed Baba said, pointing over the waters, he says, somewhere over here, over on 2 acres, we'll try to build this. And he says, over in the ocean? He says, no, first you have to reclaim the land for me, and then we can build an auditorium. In short, the journey began. He was sent all over Europe, America to study auditoriums. And sure enough, when he came back, he made the best in Asia, the auditorium. And so much was the trust. He was a family man, had a son, still has a son and such. But Jamshed Baba had so much trust in him that when he was passing away, he left his entire property, all his things in the name of one person, Mr. Biswas. And he took us around. He had arranged for an auction because he knew his end of life was there. And soon after Swami's program, he had arranged that auction. And when Swamiji went to Mumbai, we were very enthusiastic, very busy. He said, I want to do two things. I want to make those big, beautiful pictures. And he ordered hundreds and hundreds of flowers around it. And later, he said, I want to meet Swamiji for a moment if I can get an interview. And he went with his son. I asked him later, because Swami's day was very busy that day. And I asked him, did you meet Swamiji? He said, yes. I was in the room and he looked at all of us. He thanked us for coming, doing the program. And he said, then Swamiji had to go for an interview. And as he was going, he stopped, he held my hand. And he said, he looked in my eyes. And he said, Biswas, I know you. And he tapped me on the forehead and then he left. And a few months later, Biswasji left his body at midnight on 14th January, when Indian Hindu New Year begins. What is that? Makar Sankranti. I got the news next day. Makar Sankranti. His son. Now, it is very strange. You see, our mind cannot gauge how things happen because he got a heart attack. Well, Master got a heart attack. So his son was saying, why did my father get a heart attack if he was a yogi? I was just telling, I said, don't judge. If Swami said these things to your father, and I said, your father, you know now what the power of pure desire. Biswasji said he read autobiography about 35 years ago. And he says, my only desire was, since the day I created this auditorium, someday my Guru's program be conducted here. And in the last quarter of his life, that desire was fulfilled in such a beautiful way. So where Divine Mother places us, what she's expecting of us, how she will work through us. He was a great Kriya Yogi. He used to perform. He took me to his temple and how he used to do these things. But discussing, I want to pick on two lines from Lahiri Mahashaya's life. One, he said, meditate unceasingly. And which is to say, he would always say, do more Kriya, do Kriya unceasingly. And I was thinking about it. I've read that line so many times. Today I was thinking, how does one meditate unceasingly? I mean, he was actually maybe literally meditating unceasingly. But see, friends, meditation for most of us, Master says, I'm introducing it as a technique. I'm introducing it as a way by which you can get acquainted to bliss, to joy, different aspects of God. And he says, but meditation itself is the state of absorption. Now, if you saw Kriyananda ji, he was not sitting and meditating. He was absorbed, but he was absorbed in that state all the time. It could be a very mundane thing he would be doing, but he was absorbed, and we could feel around his presence that he was absorbed. The same thing as I felt around Biswasji, as we feel in our meditations briefly. But Master also, Swami said, Master told him once, joy is a long-term proposition. Which is to say that, and he also told Swami, make haste slowly. That, you feel it when you do a few kriyas, you feel it in meditation, you certainly feel it, Master would say, around me all the time. But how will you get it for yourself? It's a long-term proposition. Keep working at it. Another thing Lahiri Mahashaya would say was, you belong to no one and no one belongs to you. A very stark statement to make for a householder, a person who very much cared for his wife. Later when he descended from the ceiling, he told her, he says, don't do it. She said, I will never do this again. And then he kind of, understood, and he said, you will never be lacking in money. And, soon he left his body and one of his disciples took care of the family forever. So for him to say, what was that statement? You belong to no one and no one belongs to you. Again, I thought of it, it's a statement of non-attachment. And non-attachment, is that not a part and parcel? It is an attitude. But if we understand Kriya Yoga itself, Kriya Yoga, Master says, is Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is the Ashtanga Yoga. In Ashtanga Yoga, non-attachment is one of the yamas. And Master actually said it was one of the highest ones. When he says, finally, you're not even attached to that identity that you are the one who is meditating, He says, then you will get the gift of it. He also said, when you are detached to your present incarnation, one by one, or whichever way, he says the past will be revealed to you. Maybe to deal with in meditation, maybe to offer up to God, who knows. But such is the power of non-attachment. So he was not saying take care of the family or job or accounting, write poems on the ledger. He was saying, do what you are doing carefully, but do not mistake. Because what happens with attachment? We all have been, I think, gone through experiences in life where we are attached to somebody, family, friends, siblings. And I realized a few years ago, what was the problem with attachment? The problem was the ego can simply never give what God can deliver. So there is an inherent natural limitation in it. Nobody has to be blamed for it, that, you are not able to, why are you like this? That's what people say. No, Swami says, why are you always like this? Well, people are always like this, and the world will always be like this because they are in ego. We are in ego, and ego has a limitation. When that ego is self-offered, and by others, by ourselves, when we offer it, we find God. God comes to us to that degree. And when he was warning, that was a statement of truth. He was warning, you belong to no one, and no one belongs to you. That don't be caught in that trap. Maybe, I bet he certainly knew that these difficult times will be coming, busy times will be coming, and we should adopt that attitude. Another thing I would say is, again, I was also meditating, what would happen if, let's say we have 5 avatars, if we did not have the example of Lahiri Mahashaya? Again, how people would associate spirituality with a sadhu, with somebody, because it is such a hard goal. Master says that's the hardest thing one can do. Actually, it is the culmination of all our incarnations. It requires 50% of God's involvement, 25% of a God realized Master's involvement. How can that thing ever be accomplished? A worldly person would say, Master actually said the veil of Maya is so heavy. If we did not have the grace and the example of saints, people's eyelids would not even lift to think of such a possibility. And think about it, if we did not have examples, because I only in this year, after many years, I'm feeling and meditating on Lahiri Mahashaya's presence very consciously. And yesterday we had a beautiful 20 minutes of practice towards the midnight of self-offering. That let's offer one by one things to him. And in that period, many people later said they were just feeling that with every offering, it was as if a wave of blessing was coming from him, because he understands what a difficult situation this is. So the point is, let's see the example of his life in the realm of time also, because he was all for it. Give yourself time. And I see that very beautifully happening as my own life is extending on this path. And as the center matures, just this last week, let's talk of last week, we fulfilled about 150 orders on the Ananda store, which is a new online business we have started. We are having to do many meetings for accounting of it. And we are trying to fulfill those things. We are sending books to all parts of India. So that happened in this last month. Just 4 days ago, which was close to his birthday actually, Lahiri Mahashaya Mahasamadhi Day, we had a beautiful meeting with the founder and chancellor of Symbiosis Institute. And after he read and heard what we had to say, he had met Swamiji and he very fondly remembered that Gayatri met an old friend right there. He had chosen one person in his entire department, and she happened to be a person who Gayatri knew very well. That lady is the head of education, department for all their 5 schools in Pune. We had a meeting later, and she said, I'll speak to the principals right away. This is exactly what we need for our parents, for our teachers, for our children. So again, and I was sharing in the mail this morning I've been sending to Kriyabans, that Lahiri Mahashaya was very much interested in actually the education and the overall development of youth, which again missed my attention all these years. So focusing like things that are happening through our congregation here, education, taking these teachings into education. And actually here is Mr. Thite, whose college we've taken as a prototype for a rural college where we are applying the principles of education for life. So one by one, and again we have the monastery which is now established over here in Pune. We have nuns over here. We have more and more family members coming. We have children coming over here. And if we just gave it that element of time, 10 years, 15 years, like he gave, And Divine Mother knows what she's trying to accomplish. He met Babaji, wanted to avoid him after seeing him. I mean, you would have to think Babaji veiled himself. But Lahiri Mahashaya says, I have to go back to my office. And he says, wait a minute, let me touch you. Let me thump you on the chest. Why Divine Mother has placed us here. So let's not be in conflict with that. Let's be open to it. Let's go one step at a time with whatever we are seeing in the moment, and through daily meditation, service and devotion, as Swami writes in Discipleship. And as I saw with the beautiful example of Biswasji, I would say let's move one step at a time as a family together. Joy to you.